Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Mike Guardia, and you are watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is cool. I love talking to Mike. Mike writes a lot of books about military history, sometimes biographies, sometimes, manuscripts on leadership, those kind of things. And so this latest one is real interesting, very akin to The Rifle. If you guys have watched the show and you know about Andrew's book, basically he's got these firsthand accounts of what happened to different warriors in World War II. And as you note in the book write up, at least on Amazon, that 100 or so or more veterans from World War II die every day. So this history is literally dying out right now. And then quick on the heels of that is Korea. So I guess my opening question to you, Mike, is why don't we care as much about Korea? Like, why do we still, all these years later, and it's important to get the World War II story, why aren't we as focused on the Korea War story? It's like sort of the forgotten war.
Right. And I really think that is a function of where it falls in the timeline, because you have Korea sandwiched in between World War II and Vietnam. And then on one side of the spectrum, you have World War II, which was, for all intents and purposes, the greatest conflict in human history. And everyone was on board with the mission. And then, it's on the other side of the bookend, you have Vietnam, which was an incredibly divisive war that pretty much, well, I guess the best way that I could describe it is that it really tore the social fabric of the country apart. And, then not only was it such a controversial war, but when a lot of those veterans came back home, they were castigated and they were spat upon, and it really left a bitter taste in America's collective soul about what we had done over there. And it really took a long time for us to really collectively recover from that. So I think being that you have those two major events on either side of that conflict, that's really the reason why you have the Korean War in the middle that tends to be forgotten.
Yeah, and it's a shame because there's, that form of warfare was still active, and there's all kinds of Medal of Honor winners from that fight. And, we sort of know about MASH, man-made, and that's kind of fading out, right? And then we quickly lose track of it. And you're right, like, does the emotion, it just got drowned out by the other two. I mean, World War II is way bigger. It's a gigantic war, and there were 1,000 stories because we were in, 50 countries, shots were fired, or 100 countries now, or whatever it is. The number's ridiculous. And Vietnam was so bad in terms of the emotions and TV being able to capture it. I guess you're right about there's just no room for it, right? Like, it's just, we've got the other two fights already taking up all the space.
Well, Pete, I really think that there is a lot of room in the historiography for it. I really just think that it's a shame that it doesn't get more coverage, because you have so many incredible stories that came out of that conflict, and a lot of people just don't know about it.
It also it isn't basically a tie that's still held today. And again, you have a loss, you have this giant win, and then you have a tie. It's kind of the same thing where, it gets relegated to not even third in our attention span, because World War I's had a bit of a renaissance as well in terms of being talked about and created with,
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, you write a lot of different books. A lot of times it's about units. You're about to write a book. You're in the process of writing a book about Delta Company 165th. And that, you do that quite a bit. Why did you pick the World War II individual story template for this book?
Well, I really think what it boils down to is I had a tremendous sense of urgency. When I think back to everything that our World War II generation has accomplished, and I really think back to all of the tremendous, incredibly tremendous, all of the sacrifices that they made. You know, I really wanted to highlight everything that they had done. And, you know, for me, it was also a sense of urgency because we are losing those members of the World War II generation at an alarming rate. And, you know, you have something to the tune of about 300 to 400 at the lower end who are leaving us every day. And it really is imperative for us to get their stories down on paper and to really preserve their legacy so that we can ensure that all of their stories don't die off with them.
Even the youngest guys who got in at the very end of the war are approaching 100 years old.
Right.
Yes, it's we are really at the end, and maybe some of these guys will, and we've seen them get to 105, 110.
Right.
But waiting around for 10 more years, there's not going to be many of them left at all.
No. Mm-mm.
So one of the things that we often hear about World War II veterans is that they never talked about it, came home and bottled it up, either drank too much or just got to work or just toughed it out or whatever they did, but they didn't talk about the fight. How did you approach that problem?
Well, you know, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to try and find an inroad somehow. I wanted to try and collect as many firsthand stories from World War II veterans as I could, and also try to find as many of them as I could who were still living. And from there, what I did was I said, okay, well, now that I have identified these blocks of veterans, what can I do from there to really try to gain their trust and, you know, and also approach them to say that, okay, myself being a veteran, I would really like to get your story down on paper, because I think that in a macro sense, we have so much that we can learn from all of our World War II veterans. And I really would like your story to be put down on paper so that all of our future generations can benefit from it. So that really was the first tack that I took. And, you know, also I consider it a blessing that I live here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, because there's an organization up here that's called the World War II Roundtable. And what they do is every single month at the Minnesota History Center, they have a roundtable event where they have World War II veterans come to speak. And these are World War II veterans who not only live in the Twin Cities area, but also live in other places. They fly them in and they share all of their experiences. And a lot of those oral histories are subsequently recorded, and they're shared as part of their academic and school outreach program to, you know, show all the school children ages 5 to 18, you know, hey, this is what earlier generations have accomplished. And these were everyday normal people just like you and I, who, when they were confronted with a challenge, they ended up rising to the occasion. And, you know, they were also able to take it on with an extended amount of grace. And they were able to take the bull by the horns, and they were able to defeat a qualitatively evil force that, you know, was trying to run roughshod over the world.
Yeah. We often package World War II into very specific things. D-Day, Battle of the Bulge,
right?
The War in the Pacific, you know.
Right.
But one of the guys that, and we're trying to have him back on, but, you know, Woody is, gosh, if he's not 100 years old, he's 99, you know, and he's the last, I think he's the last surviving Medal of Honor winner from the entire conflict. And he was on Iwo Jima. And so that's where we focus our efforts.
Right.
But he also was part of the Marine units that liberated Guam, which is still a day that's celebrated on Guam. You know, the I don't know if they call it Liberation Day or whatever it is, but Woody and his crew were part of that fighting force that came on and ended the horrible, horrible Japanese occupation. We don't even think about Remembrance Day. I think that's what they call it. because there are just so many of these things. We kind of just package it into. Then there was Iwo Jima. Maybe we talk about Saipan, and then then we drop some atomic bombs, and then game over. We've simplified it very much, but in reality, Tarawa. I mean, there are so many. Oh my gosh, New Caledonia, all these really, really hard fights. And I would imagine that for a lot of these fights, there aren't a whole lot of firsthand reports left. And then what about the folks who were in support of guys going forward? Did you grab any of those stories? Because that also has to be, really compelling information. Like when you look at okay, yeah, the guys on the front line, but I'm the guy that was able to do the thing that allowed this, all these other back channel things that would give these guys because you're desperate as a support guy, you're desperate to give those guys in the front line exactly what they need and to find any answer for their problem,
Exactly. And that was really part of the spirit that I wanted to capture within the pages of the book, that you have a lot of attention that is given to the men who are on the front line, but there is, I really think that there is very little. I really think that there is always very little thought that's given to all of the supporting establishments who support those men on the front lines, because it's an old adage in military history that if you have good equipment, all that equipment will help you win the battle, but you really need good logistics to win the war.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you grab any of the logistics stories at all, or are the frontline stories the bulk of the book?
I did. As a matter of fact, there is a chapter in the book that highlights the services of a combat mailman, no less. There's one chapter in the book where you have an Army postal worker who is explaining what his role as a postal worker is in the military, and you see, not coincidentally, he was also a postal service worker before the war. That's how he was able to become an army postman. But while he's describing how he's getting letters to the troops, how he's being that conduit between the troops on the front line and all their families back home, he's also telling the story of how he became a Johnny-on-the-spot rescue operation when he was in a convoy that was going to the Philippines, and it was the troop ship in front of him that sustained a direct hit, and he ended up pulling some wounded sailors and Marines out of the water and bringing them on board. And he also said that even though I was a postal worker by trade, in many ways I was also expected to contribute to the health and welfare of the ship itself. That's why whenever I was on board the ship, even though I wasn't technically part of the ship's company, they gave me a job to do. So that's why I was made an assistant gunner on one of the anti-aircraft batteries. And he also said that was an adventure in and of itself, because here I was a mailman, yet I was learning everything that I never wanted to know about how to operate one of these anti-aircraft guns. And that was also my first introduction to the kamikaze attacks. He said, you can read about kamikaze on paper, but as soon as you see it happening in real time, it has such a strong psychological effect.
Yeah, we had a guy on the show. He was in Vietnam. He was an intel guy like me, like a collector, out in front and everything. Yeah. But sometimes, as an officer, you're given extra details, and he was the pay officer this month, and so he had to fly to go get the money. And then everything about this is hard. Like the airstrip they're going to land on isn't really built for the plane that they're on, but that is the plane that they have, and that is the airship available. And so of course, there's like the plane crash, and the guy who delivers the mail, that they're desperate to do their job. They're like, these guys need mail, and I'll be damned if I'm gonna be afraid of this or whatever it is. And they take on their own version of courage. And like you said, so many times, like, oh, by the way, this horrible thing happens, and I was thrown into this fight, or all of a sudden you go from being this rear action guy to being not only on the front lines, but, with no real it's all chaos. And then you're in the middle of this situation trying to, survive whatever it is that you're in, and then also do your part. And you can't for a moment think I'm in peril. Like you're like, yeah, I have to at least accept this much danger because the guys are out there every day with constant and way more danger.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to show you a picture.
Okay.
This is a picture. Apparently, this is the thought, the belief of my grandfather who found this side of my family, and he flew Hellcats in World War II, right? Mm-hmm. And he's passed on. But let me pull that picture back down now. But so that picture is, it's a press photo, but it had to be two pilots in it, and so the belief in the family is that was him. You can kind of see his face and everything. But one of the stories that he would tell was that when they came back in, they sailed in under the Golden Gate Bridge when he was in the Navy. And so he was in his plane when this happened. And so he flew in under the Golden Gate Bridge upside down. You have all these incredible things. And, look, if you've just been in war and you're coming back and you're, like, what are you going to do? Send me back to war and everything. I've done all these great things. But there's all these nutty stories that surely just happened. Someone maybe wrote it down on a log, or maybe they didn't. But maybe they have a living memory of it. What are the odds on confirming something like that? Like if the ship he was on, do you think, is it possible that someone out there remembers that day and seeing crazy, Don Norton flying upside down under the bridge?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a very high probability, because what I found is it's incredibly interesting to see how each one of these veterans retain memories and, all of the collective things that stick out in their mind. Yeah.
The collective memory.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it isn't real or you can't confirm it, it sure seems like something that, we all would be either like cheering when the guy does it or whatever.
Right.
You could even see a captain of the ship being like, yeah, that's fine. Tomorrow that won't be okay, but today,
right.
It's all right.
I know. And it makes for some great color commentary.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
What story shocked you the most of all? Let's
see. I got to tell you, Pete, the one that really shocked me the most was the story about Commando Kelly. And for any of the viewers out there who are unfamiliar with that name, I'll go ahead and fill them in. So the story about Commando Kelly is one that I really think is equal parts triumph and tragedy, because on the one hand, you had a guy who was the very first Medal of Honor to come out of the European theater. And what he did in combat was really just nothing short of amazing. I mean, Rambo has nothing on this guy. And if you are to take a look at any number of the photo montages that he is a part of, what you really see is like, wow, I mean, this guy has a completely unassuming appearance to him. He really doesn't look like the stereotypical Hollywood depiction of what a tough guy should be.
Right.
But everything that he accomplished, I mean, oh my God, it really is something that would have come out of a movie script.
Yeah.
And for him to hold off almost single-handedly an entire German assault force in the manner that he did, he picks up one bar rifle, he fires that until it runs out of ammunition. And then he picks up another bar rifle, fires that until it runs out of ammo. Then he picks up a bazooka, fires off a few rounds of that. And he's doing this all from the confines of a house in Italy that his unit has occupied. And, he sets down one weapon, he sets it up against the bed. And of all things, that bed, it ends up catching fire, but he's completely unmoved by the flames. He's just trying to deliver fires onto the enemy. Yeah. And then when he runs out of when he runs out of bazooka rounds, he takes up these mortar rounds, and he said, you know what? I don't really need a mortar tube in order to use these. He just taps it on the windowsill, which activates the charge, and then he starts throwing that out the window to the Germans. And then he goes down to the basement of the house so he can get a good line of sight to start picking off German snipers. And while he's doing all of this, he's actually facilitating the withdrawal of his unit from that forward edge that they're occupying, so that they can so that they can regroup and that they can resupply. And for him to pull all that off, you would think that it would be the start of what would be an absolutely tremendous military career. And if he doesn't stay in the military, he would at least be able to parlay all of that success in the military into a successful civilian career. But tragically, that just wasn't the case, because when he came back, his tour in civilian life was really nothing short of a tragedy. And he really seemed to one, not be able to catch a break, and two, not be able to effectively cope and wrestle with the demons that he had acquired from his overseas tour. Because his first stop was he got out, he had all the fanfare, he was part of the big public relations tours, trying to get people to buy more war bonds. And he goes home to his native Pittsburgh, and at that point he decides, well, you know what, I really think I want to try my hand at being an entrepreneur. So he opens up a service station, and it's incredibly successful for its first 2 years until it becomes the victim of an armed robbery. So that pretty much evaporates his business at that point. And if that's not enough of a tragedy to withstand, his first wife comes down with cancer, and he pours almost every bit of his finances into trying to keep her alive. But tragically, 2 years later, she passes away. And it seems that he is at a low ebb until the summer of 1952, when President Eisenhower is starting to kick off his campaign. And because he's touring around the country at all these different campaign stops, Ike says, well, you know what? I think a very good person to have on the campaign trail with me is the very same man that I gave the Medal of Honor to back in Europe, the first Medal of Honor to come out of the European theater, where I was the Allied commander. So he puts Commando Kelly on the campaign tour with him, and in a roundabout way, he ends up securing him a job with the highway department in the state of Kentucky. And Kelly remarries. He seems that he's going to have a very stable life at this point. But for one reason or another, he's able to maintain a facade of stability until about 1961, where at that point, tragically, he abandoned his family, and he ended up living an itinerant existence for about the next 25 years. And his habitual alcoholism eventually caught up to him, and he wandered into a VA hospital in Pittsburgh, and they hooked him up to dialysis because he couldn't effectively wrestle with his alcoholism at that point. But then he facilitates his own death by pulling all of his medical machines that are keeping him on dialysis, and he eventually passes away during the night in January of '85. And that really shocked me because, well, one, I think that he was given a raw deal, and I think that he should have been afforded more success in his life than what was ultimately given to him. I think that he was dealt a very unfair hand. But more than that, I think in a broader sense, it underscores just how little attention was given to the mental health of our returning veterans at the time.
Yeah.
No one really had grappled with the long-term effects of PTSD back then, and it really wasn't a flashpoint within American society until we hit the Vietnam War. I think why a lot of attention wasn't given to it back then was because all of the returning veterans were expected to pick up right where they had left off.
Right.
And I think the prevailing attitude was, well, we were fighting a good war. We knew the cause that we were fighting for. So you guys should be happy that we won. And you should take solace in the fact that we have achieved victory against all of the evil forces of fascism, and you can essentially go back to your normal lives, and you can just be happy that you can be happy that we won the war, and you can cash in any number of these GI Bill benefits. But it really became a ticking time bomb for a lot of our World War II veterans, because they really didn't have that support structure there to help integrate them back into society. And it is a night and day difference from all of these support mechanisms that we have now. Whether it's in the form of VA counseling or any number of the warrior transitions units that we have within the Army. It really serves as a clarion call that, hey, heroes like this and how his story ultimately folded out, that is the exact reason why we need all of these mental health assets in place.
Yeah. We should definitely take a moment here and just talk about this, because part of what I do is Save the Brave, and everybody's looking to Save the Brave. We're a charity that is trying to end veteran suicide. And then when the inevitable still happens, how do you support these families that have to soldier on, if you will, and get through these times? So how do we do that? And there's a bit of a misnomer that we think we'll say, hey, reach out. Well, I'm saying fuck that. It's on us as a community, everybody, and not just the veteran community, but like people, and you reach out to all of your people that you care about. Spend time doing this. And I posted this on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Someone was talking about the recent SEAL that had died by suicide. And it was like, well, we wished he would have reached out. Like, yeah, but when you're fighting for your life, if you're drowning, you're like, hey, right before you die, if you would, just reach out, and then I'll be there, And you may not be able to, you have to be comfortable with the fact that you may not even be able to save that person because they're in such peril. So let's understand that, and let's not expect them to, let's not put the responsibility on them to reach out. They're likely fighting as hard as they can right now today, and they're just going down, down, down. And some of those folks are able to self-arrest. I've been able to pretty much, ensure my safety indefinitely, but I felt that way where I didn't have value or whatever. And one of the things we know now through a lot of work is that there is a physical response that guys like me who have seen a lot of combat time and struggle with depression and anxiety and all these other things, there's a physical adaptation. There's like a ganglion knot of nerves back here, and that's responsible for sending the chemicals into your brain that allow you to operate. And so I guess in some ways you could say, instead of this is weakness, we're just highly adaptable to danger, right? And so our body is adapted to shoot more cortisol than you would normally need, but there's no natural pruning mechanism in this case. And so you have this brain that activates all the time, and it makes you make poor decisions because you're not actually in the same level of conflict that you were before. So here's this guy, this incredible, fight. By the way, should have been a Medal of Honor, right? Hey, great job, Arcom. And you're like, oh,
yeah,
Arcom.
Or we'll make it an Arcom with a V device. So.
All right, we'll give you a V. We're going to downgrade it to, you're like, oh God. There's so many of those stories too. But if he gets the Medal of Honor, he's part of that club. And I'm not saying it's a guaranteed income for the rest of your life, but you've got this ability to go out and market yourself and be something and have some kind of stability with being in that community. So you don't get into that. You're just the next guy in line. Hey, good job. There's your Arcom with the V device. Go home. See you later. And hey, don't forget the GI Bill, So we all as a community, don't put it on the person who's suffering. If you've got cancer, hey, you got cancer at stage 4, you may or may not make it. Let me know when you need help. Get in there, get involved, everybody. And one of the guys who responded, he's like, yeah, you're right, from time to time. And I'm like, not from time to time. It has to be constant. You have to always be thinking how do we care for one another? And way before they get into trouble, get involved, get together, have fellowship, find purpose, solve problem, whatever it is, put yourself to work on building lives and surrounding people around you that are building lives that matter and support one another. Because then when someone suffers, it's not just one person at the last second reaching out saying, I think I might die today. it's like, hey, I've gotten better because I've gotten the help. And us, how us veterans are, Mike, we're stubborn. We don't want to go get help. We don't want to accept the weakness. You don't want to have to go to a head shrinker or whatever.
Right.
But you'll sure as hell drink a bunch of creatine, take a bunch of, off the shelf supplements to make your body big and strong, and go to the gym all the time. Same attitude for your nugget. You got to go out and take care of that thing and be driven about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox here in a second, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, thank God we have all the support systems in place today.
Now, right.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a difference. The other thing, and I should say this, I'm going to start promoting this. The annual Ride for the Brave with Save the Brave is going to happen basically the last week of July. So July 22nd, we'll take off from Temecula, and then we'll scooch across the bottom of the nation. So Temecula, El Paso, Odessa, Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, and then Charleston. So here's the way you can get involved. One, you can just go to savethebrave.org and you can donate there, and we're going to put that money to work trying to help save veterans. Two, you can come out and meet us on the ride. Three, if you want to ride, sign up. We'd love to get a donation if you ride with us, or just when we stop, buy some shirts, put some money in the pocket, and we'll put that money to work saving veterans. And also, if you want to ride along with me for one or two or all of the legs in my truck, I'm going to drive my truck across the nation. Let me know. We'll work out something, and you can do a donation and like, hey, I want to buy that seat and sit next to Pete. Maybe you're driving, maybe you're sitting shotgun, whatever it is. But why not come on a cross-country trip? It's a lot of fun. All right, so Save the Brave, last week of July. Hit me up, peterbreakitdownshow.com. Let me know how you want to get involved. If you got some other idea, we're open to it. Let me know what we can do to get you involved and help invest in trying to save veterans' lives. Because as Mike's story illustrates, there's a lot of folks out there that need a little bit of help, and we can do a lot of good with that stuff. So, all right. That's the most shocking. What story didn't make the book that you're like, damn, I wish I had more space in the book to put that in?
Well, that actually dovetails into what my plans are for an anthology series for the Combat Diaries, because what I wanted to do with this first book was actually make it the first in a series of books that I'm writing about World War II. And, there's going to be a Combat Diaries Volume 2, 3, and 4. And there are really a ton of stories, that I am planning to put together. And let's see. So as far as stories that I had toyed with the idea of putting in Volume 1, but I actually decided to save it for Volume 3, was one that actually looks at all of the duties that were incurred by American troops in the Army of Occupation in Japan, because I really wanted to get a good perspective on that. It seems to me that when we typically tell the story of World War II, we tend to focus on what happened at Pearl Harbor, and then we go forward, and the narrative for a lot of us stops after the bombs falls on Nagasaki. And it's like, okay, well, once the Japanese have surrendered, that is really where you have the meat and bones of all of the historical narratives for World War II. But I noticed that there is a lot less attention given to what a lot of our soldiers experienced while they were in the Army of Occupation. How they were, how they approached that mission, for one, because you had a lot of soldiers and Marines who said, okay, well, we just spent the last 4 years fighting an incredibly bloody war against the Japanese, and we saw a lot of their fanatical attitudes firsthand. We saw the bonsai charges. We saw all of the atrocities that they were committing against civilians. How do we know that they are not going to do the same thing to us, even though we are now an Army of Occupation? How essentially, how deep is this rabbit hole going to go? Are we going to have a full scale insurgency on our hands? And the collective attitude that a lot of these folks in the Army of Occupation had within about the first 3 months on the job was one of complete surprise. They said, wow, how can the Japanese so quickly go from this horrific enemy that we've been fighting to some of the most pleasant and some of the most cooperative and some of the nicest people that we have ever encountered in our entire lives. And for a lot of them, it actually begged the question. It's like, what, were we fighting two different enemies? Are these two different people? Is the Japanese soldier a night and day difference from his civilian counterpart? And not only that, it boggled the minds of a lot of our troops to have these interactions with a lot of Japanese officials to say, wow, how quickly can they, can they turn on the can they turn on the Bushido warrior and then switch it off to become Mr. Johnny Nice Guy next door.
Yeah.
And it was really how they navigated those waters. And, also the encounters that a lot of them had when they were able to mingle with the Japanese civilians and ended up taking on Japanese wives, many of whom returned to the U.S. as war brides. So, that really is a pretty good sociological study in and of itself. And I had considered making that the final chapter of the Combat Diaries, but I said, well, no, when I actually get to volume 3, that's going to be focusing exclusively on the Pacific War. So I'll have that be something that I save. I'll be saving that for that volume.
Nice. Yeah, we've actually coincidentally had 2 different warriors who ended up being part of the army of occupation in Japan who brought home those people. One of the stories, and I'll put a link to the episode, a guy named T. Martin Bennett wrote it. And if I have this correct, and I'm on memory here, the guy who was the first guy to fly into Pearl Harbor and hated Americans and bombed the shit out of us for as long as he could, that guy flipped and became an American and loved America by the end of his life. I mean, this dramatic, like he was this, I don't know, I guess you have to call him a zealot, and like absolutely going to do this. And because of how everything went in the years after, there was this great healing. And, it did happen that way. One of the survivors of the USS Indy, he's passed on, and his wife just recently passed, but she was from Japan. And one of his jobs post Indy sinking and getting back to the States and figuring anything out was to be part of that occupation army in Japan. And his son has been on the show and actually had T. Martin Bennett and then the other guy on the show, and they talked about this healing that happened, and this dichotomy of these fanatical warriors who would throw their lives into this cause, to the point of like, you only need enough training to fly one way. You're just going to run into something as they were losing the war, obviously, but they could line up people to do this. It is a remarkable healing. What do you attribute that to? Like, we don't seem to have that today. Like, we don't have a bunch of dudes going to Iraq, bringing back Iraqi wives, that kind of thing. It's just not a thing right now, right?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it had to do with the nature of the conflict itself. And I also think it was a different time. I think it was a very clear-cut instance of we have one military that's fighting another military. We have an enemy who is clearly defined. We have an enemy who whose patterns of behavior we at least we think is predictable, and and we will approach this in as much of a clinical manner as we can. But once the war is over, once the bullets have stopped firing, and once we have a signed document that says, okay, we have one side who's a winner and we have one side who's a clear loser, then that's when we can go back to being friends again. And I really think in a collective sense, there was a sense of urgency to get past all of the hard feelings. There was a sense of urgency to get back to normalcy. There was a sense of urgency to establish peace and also to make a long-lasting peace. So I think that was our attitude going into it. And then at the same time, you also had a remarkable great psychology on the part of most of the Japanese citizens who said, wow, all of the perversions of the Bushido warrior code that we have taken to an unhealthy extreme have led to all of these second and third order effects that have really hurt our country collectively. And maybe we need to reevaluate, how we approach the international community. And, there has to be some reconciliation between ourselves and all of the individuals that we've hurt along the way. So when you have those two psychological forces that are meeting in the middle, and now that the war is over, I think that's really what sowed the seeds for the ongoing friendship that we have with the Kingdom of Japan today.
It didn't happen with Germany. Is it? And I'm not trying to have a whole long discussion about the atomic bomb, but is this one of the things, like Hollywood picked the Nazis and politically picked Nazis as like the history, heel of history, right? And the Japanese did more widespread atrocities across the board. And we seem to have gotten past that with Japanese. Is that, I don't know, what sense do you make of that? And I mean, look, it's easier to get back together with Germany because our nation has got a lot of Germans in it, right? But we also have a lot of Japanese. I don't know. How do you deal with those differences?
Well, that is a good question, Pete. I think it is attributable to a lot of reasons, actually. I think for one, we always tended to identify Germany as a greater threat than the Japanese. We saw in a lot of ways we had seen Germany as the instigator, and we also had a history with Germany because not only fighting them in World War II, but we had fought them. We had fought them previously in World War I, and I think I think it was really just that history of antagonism, and it was a longstanding history of mistrust that really sowed the seeds. And I think it made it harder for Americans to collectively let go. And, I think that also represented itself in terms of the Europe First policy that we had, because at the time, even though it was Japan that attacked us, we said, okay, Europe is going to be the priority because because the longstanding wisdom was that Germany could win the war without Japan, but Japan could not win the war without Germany.
Right.
And they said, okay, if we were to take out Germany first, that would be the rough equivalent of cutting the head off of the snake, because once the head of the snake is gone, then the rest of the body will die. And there was a very big emphasis on treating Germany as a bigger threat in a geopolitical context, because we were conducting all of our closest trade and had our closest diplomatic relations with all of the countries in mainland Europe. So we said, okay, well, if he doesn't stop in Europe, he's going to spread, and he's going to spread farther, and he's going to bring along as many third parties as he can to add to his growing list of stooges. And it's eventually going to snowball to North America. Of
course, the Japanese did get us in.
Right. Yeah.
What a crazy thing.
Yeah.
So first off, we're talking with Mike Guardia, who writes fantastic military histories. He's actually working on one for Company 165th currently right now. But this book is about World War II stories. Let me pull up the link to the actual book so I can say the name of it. And okay, the Combat Diaries: True Stories from the Front Lines of World War II. Combat Diaries: True Stories from the Front Lines of World War II, and that's the link for it right down below. Here's what I always suggest: buy one of these books; they aren't that pricey. Or in fact, buy two and do a buddy read with somebody else. So if you're interested, I'll buddy read this with you, and I'll buy my book, and I'm going to buy one from somebody else. You do the same, and we'll do a buddy read, and we'll sell a couple of books today for Mike, because I really appreciate what he does. And look, he cranks out, I don't know, what do you do? Three books, 4 books a year? It seems like you're always cranking these things out.
I I try to do about two to three books a year. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fast. I mean, this guy works hard. And right now he's working on this Delta Company book.
It's the only thing I'm good at. So
you always say that. And yet it might be true. No, come on. You're a good dad. I always see pictures of you with your kids. And there's a lot of love to be a good dad as well. There's my man Speedy Cop checking in, saying hi, Mike and Pete. And also Sebastian is also checking in and saying, hey. How do you pick a story? I mean, I talked you into doing this Delta Company, and I think it's a great story, but you don't always have me pushing a story on you. You must get angles. You must look and find things. How do you decide?
Well, in a lot of ways, really a lot of these stories actually tend to find me. I will put one story out and it will have a certain market audience, and then any number of people from that audience will reach out to me and say, hey, Mike, I was in this particular unit and I really think that it would make a good story. Or they say, hey, I have a grandfather or I have an uncle who, was in this particular time and place. And I think if you were to get his story down on paper, it would be fabulous. Or, I will be giving a presentation somewhere and someone will say, well, hey, I know you wrote about this guy, but he was friends or he was business associates or he was a colleague of this other fellow right here. Right. Is this a particular name that you recognize? And do you think you could do a story about him? And that is an executive summary of how a lot of these stories come my way. And I will also be researching one particular story that I'm writing about, and then I find a snippet or I find a footnote that will grab my attention, and I'll jot that down and I'll say, hey, you know what? That would be a great rabbit hole to go down in about 6 months after I finish this current manuscript. And so I'll jot that down. I'll put it on my calendar, and then I start diving into that. Then I will start diving into that, and it cascades into an entirely new project. So I'm always on the lookout, and I've found that audience feedback is a great way for me to zero in on new stories.
What do the people ask? When people talk to me about the show, like, what's your favorite episode? And I'm like, Jesus Christ, there's 1,300 of them, I can't even remember all the episodes, right? There's been so many. And yet there's a lot of clarity on a lot of them, which is pretty amazing. When you look at your work, which book are you the most proud of? Is it like, oh, it's the one I'm working on now because I can't focus on the old ones? But when you have a chance, like you've done a lot of stuff with real live interviews with some legends. I mean, some true. Did you interview Sergeant Major Plumley? You did, right? For all of those things?
I actually did not. He passed away, I think about 6 months or so into all of the research that I was doing for the first Hal Moore book. And he was notorious for being a completely private individual. I mean, he had turned down so many interviewers before. I was just like, well, I really don't think I want to poke the bear, but I had a slew of good interviews with Hal Moore, and a lot of Hal Moore's associates. I mean, like Tony Nadal and Dick Merchant and all those guys.
Which style of book do you like the best? Do you like the biographies better, or the histories, or like the leadership driven books that you've done? Which one strikes your fancy the best?
I think I tend to gravitate more towards the biographical stories because I'm telling the story of an individual, and throughout the broader course of that narrative, I'm able to find any number of things within their lives that is able to make them as relatable as they can be to any number of readers out there. When I dive deeper than just looking at the surface of what all their career accomplishments were, I get to dive in deep, and I say, okay, well, here is what really made this person tick. Here were some hobbies that they had on the side, and here are all of the things that they held incredibly near and dear to them, and what actually it influenced them and their families to take the paths that they did.
Yeah. It's a neat job that you've got. You get to gather a lot of information about a lot of different eras of the military. Obviously, you're picking up wisdom from this and some knowledge. How does all this stuff fit together in your head right now? Like when you look forward at fights, especially like when we watch Russia just get, I mean, absolutely. Look, Russia may or may not win that fight, but it sure as hell has been expensive in terms of, men, women, material, all that kind of stuff. How do you put all this stuff together now that you've written all of these different books?
Well, I think the biggest thing that ties it all together is really a recognition of how much of a human element is present within any wartime operation. I think it's a very stark reminder that war in and of itself is never going to be a truly clinical pursuit. That when we look at a lot of the traditional histories of war as they've been written, they have almost been written from a clinical approach, and it actually takes a parochial tone in a matter of speaking to say that, okay, it is a description of all of the maneuvers that were conducted, and here are the body counts, and here are the tactics, and here are all of the official communiques that were passed back and forth amongst all the different actors. Right. But when you really commit yourself to diving deep into a narrative, and when you really commit yourself to telling the story from the perspective of those who were there to see it in real time, that's really how you get that incredibly rich human dimension there. And that really is what makes for the best story, I think. And, all of the different events and all of the different pieces of equipment and all of the persons that I've written about, it's always that human element that ties it all together. And I think that if more histories were written with that kind of a mindset, and if more of them were written with that approach, that history, I think, in a broader sense, would have a wider fan base, and it would have a more far-reaching appeal.
Yeah, that appeal factor is something. There's enough appeal that you're writing these books, right? So it's there's enough folks that want to read them. And some of this stuff, to be honest, I'm reading about a tank battle in Iraq. I didn't, I read a lot of different stuff because of the job that I have. But it can be interesting to when you read about, this jet fighter unit, or, any of Halmore or any of the things. Some of them you're going to know about them. Some of them are very specific in their history, but always fascinating whenever I read your books.
Oh, well, thank you, Pete. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that is exactly what I go for in every story I put together.
Melissa is appreciating the subject and sending her best wishes from Chicago. You go on, Melissa. Go do it.
Oh, thank you, Melissa.
I'm going to wrap this up. So everybody definitely look. Here's the link to the book right here. It's also in the comments. You should see that. Just click on that. And again, buy a copy, buy 2 copies. I'm going to buy one, and I'm going to send it to a friend. So I'm going to be in Benicia. So I'm going to pick a friend of mine from hometown, and we're going to buddy read the book. So I'm going to buy 2. Why don't you guys do the same thing, and I'll buddy read with you. Anything in closing, Mike?
Well, to any of the viewers and listeners out there, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for stopping by. And if you ever have the fancy to pick up any one of my books, you can find them on Amazon. You can get them at Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere books are sold.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Stand by for a second, Mike.